ఒకసారి ఇది ఆఫ్ చేసి వినిపించండి. Good afternoon, everyone. So today we'll be discussing ocular trauma. So as you've already learned in the previous chapters which we have discussed, the eye is protected from injury with the help of eyelashes, eyelids, and the orbital margins which are projecting from the globe. So, in spite of all these protective mechanisms which are present in the eye can be injured in a variety of ways. So, we'll be looking at some of the causative factors of ocular trauma. Now, how can this ocular trauma be classified? So, the etiology can be classified as by the way of injury. So, the trauma can be self-inflicted, or it could be accidental trauma, or it could also be occupational trauma. According to the nature, the trauma can be physical trauma, where the trauma can be either by blunt trauma, or there could be perforating or non-perforating injuries of the eye, or there might be chemical injuries which commonly occur in factories manufacturing these chemicals, or by way of occupational hazards, or also by way of trying to harm another person. So these chemicals are commonly acids, alkalis, as well as dyes. Now, what are the thermal injuries? The thermal injuries can be either due to heat, or they can also be due to cold. What are radiation trauma? Radiation trauma could be due to ultraviolet rays, ionizing agents, or due to laser injuries. Now, the most important classification of trauma, especially of mechanical trauma, would be open globe injuries and closed globe injuries. So, first, open globe injuries, there involves a full thickness defect of the eyeball, and closed globe injuries do not have any full thickness injury of the eyeball. So this is the most important classification which you have to remember. It is the Birmingham Eye Trauma Terminology System, also known as the BETS classification. So this is a universally accepted classification of ocular trauma, the Birmingham Eye Trauma Terminology System. Now, just to go back to your anatomy, now you remember this coat is the outer fibrous coat which is known as the sclera, and this part is the cornea. So the outer fibrous coat of the eye is composed of the cornea in the front and by the sclera all around. Okay, so this is the outer fibrous coat of the eyeball. Now, this is the BETS classification, where it is classified, any mechanical eye injury is classified into closed globe and open globe injuries. Now, according to the BETS classification, eyeball is the term which refers to the outer fibrous coat of the eyeball, that is the cornea and the sclera. So, in closed globe injury, you have only a partial thickness injury of the eyeball, okay, here. Now, open globe injury consists of full thickness wound of the eyeball, and closed globe injury doesn't have a full thickness wound or has a partial thickness wound of the eyeball. Now, closed globe injury can be further divided into contusion and lamellar laceration. Now, here what happens is by way of blunt trauma. Blunt trauma implies either a punch by a ball, a punch by a fist, or injury with a cricket ball or a tennis ball, all these will lead to contusion of the eye wall. But per se, frankly, there is no breach in the sclera or the cornea. There is no breach. Okay, in lamellar laceration, either by way of blunt trauma or by way of sharp object, you will have a partial thickness wound of the eyeball. Now for open globe injury, there is a full thickness wound of the eyeball. Now open globe injury can be further classified into laceration as well as rupture. Now what is rupture? In rupture as well as laceration, the wound is full thickness, no doubt, because it is an open globe injury. But in rupture, it is usually by a blunt object, but in laceration, it is usually by a sharp object. So rupture, what happens is, as soon as the blunt object comes into contact with the globe, what happens is there is a rise of intraocular pressure and the globe ruptures. So what happens here is an inside out mechanism. That is, the rupture is coming from, it is developing inside the eyeball and the eyeball is rupturing outwards. Whereas in laceration, which usually happens by a sharp object comes in contact with the globe and it punctures the globe. So whatever laceration or opening is being created is from outside to in. Okay. So this is an outside in mechanism. This is an inside to out mechanism. Now laceration can be further classified into penetrating injury, perforating injury, and an intraocular foreign body. So in penetrating injury, just imagine something like a knife which comes into accidental contact with the globe, and because this knife will pierce maybe the cornea or the sclera, you have one entrance wound. But suppose the injury is very severe, or something like a bullet it's coming at a high speed and comes into contact with the globe. It will not only penetrate the globe, it will traverse through the globe and also exit the globe from an other exit point. So there is an entrance point as well as an exit point in perforation. In penetrating injury, there is just an entrance wound. Suppose there is a penetrating injury and then maybe some little part of the object, maybe an iron particle or a wood particle or anything, suppose it gets stuck up in the globe, then you have what is known as an intraocular foreign body. Okay. So this is the classification which you have to remember, the Betz classification. So you have to remember this classification thoroughly. Now, we'll just look at this. So mechanical ocular injuries, they can be described under the following headings. So there can be closed globe injuries, there can be open globe injuries, there can be extraocular injuries, extraocular foreign bodies, that is outside the globe or the main eyeball, and of course sympathetic ophthalmitis, which is already discussed during your uveitis chapter. Now, looking at extraocular foreign bodies. Now, extraocular foreign bodies are quite common in industrial and agricultural workers. So, usually in the ophthalmology OPD department, we come across patients who say, usually they come up and say, we are welders. I'm a welder, and I suddenly felt something has fallen into my eye, and since it has fallen, there has been a lot of irritation and watering and redness. Or agricultural workers can come up and say something has fallen into my eye, some leaf or some husks, some paddy husks or anything, they say something has fallen. So where are the extraocular foreign bodies commonly seen? They are commonly seen on the conjunctiva as well as the cornea. So on the conjunctiva, they may be seen in the sulcus subtarsalis, the conjunctival fornicis or the bulbar conjunctiva. The most common site is the sulcus subtarsalis. In cornea, usually they are embedded in the epithelium or the superficial stroma. So this is a picture of a subtarsal foreign body which is present on the tarsal conjunctiva. As you can see here, this is the everted part of the upper eyelid. You are everting the upper eyelid, and here you can see there is a foreign body which is lodged here. Now this is a corneal foreign body. This is usually present in the epithelium of the cornea. As you can also see, along with this foreign body, because of the irritation created by the foreign body, there is a lot of conjunctival condition here in this part. In corneal foreign body, sometimes you can see surrounding cellular infiltration. Okay. Now, again, this is one more picture. Here you are everting the foreign body with the help of a cotton, you are everting the upper eyelid with the help of a cotton swab, and you can finally see that there is a foreign body which is continuously irritating the conjunctiva and leading to congestion of the surrounding conjunctiva. Now, what are the symptoms with which they commonly present? Usually they present with some sensation, foreign body sensation. They present with discomfort, profuse watering and redness, and pain and photophobia are more commonly present in corneal foreign body than a conjunctival foreign body. Okay, because of the sensitized corneal nerves, there is more pain in corneal foreign body. What about defective vision? Defective vision, suppose, as you know, cornea is the main refracting surface. Suppose the same foreign body is present somewhere in this center, in the pupillary center, then obviously the patient will also present with defective vision apart from the other symptoms. Okay. Next, what are the signs of foreign bodies? Now, as you have already seen here, there is a lot of conjunctival condition, and apart from that, because of the foreign body, the patient will not allow you to immediately touch the eye. He will have blepharospasm. Now, what is blepharospasm? It is involuntary sustained closure of the eyelids. So, because of that blepharospasm, he will not allow you to touch. So sometimes what happens is, in order to look at the corneal foreign body or the conjunctival foreign body, you have to take the help of topical anesthetic drops such as proparacaine. So you instill topical anesthetic drops, then the corneal surface will be anesthetized, and then you can have a thorough examination of the foreign body lodged. So after topical anesthetic drops, you can do fluorescent staining of the cornea, and because of the foreign body lodged, what happens is there will be abrasion of the corneal epithelium. So because of that, the abraded part where the foreign body is lying will be stained fluorescent positive due to breach of the epithelium. And what about double eversion? Now what you see here is eversion of the upper lid, and you can see the foreign body. But sometimes what happens is the foreign body can be lodged very deep in the fornices, somewhere deep underneath this eyelid, between the lid and the globe. Obviously there is a very deep fornice. Yeah, so this part is your bulbar conjunctiva, and this is your palpebral, which also includes the tarsal, and the deep corners are the fornices. So the fornicial conjunctiva can be seen by double eversion of the upper lid. Okay. Now, what happens if you simply leave a foreign body like that? Obviously, the patient will be in immense discomfort. He will not be comfortable. Apart from that, if you leave it like that, there can be development of a corneal ulceration. And because the conjunctiva gets so irritated, there can be secondary bacterial infection, and as well as long-standing foreign bodies can cause pigmentation or corneal opacity formation. So these are all complications which you need to prevent by removal of the foreign body. Now, as I've already told, this was eversion of the lid with the help of a cotton swab, and this is double eversion of the lid where you can see very deep into the fornices. Now, how do you remove a corneal foreign body? Now, for conjunctival foreign body, you will evert it like this, and first you will try to remove the foreign body with the help of a cotton swab itself. You will moisten the cotton swab, and then you will try to remove the foreign body, and then if it doesn't come out, you will take the help of a needle, a 26 gauge needle. Now, this is the procedure for removing a corneal foreign body. Again, please remember the cornea is a sensitive structure, so you have to instill topical anesthetic drops to anesthetize the surface, and then it is usually preferred to remove the corneal foreign body under slit lamp examination. So you will use a 26 gauge needle for removal of the corneal foreign body. As you can see, the needle is directed tangential to the corneal surface. You're not directing it perpendicular to it. Okay, you're holding it in plane with the corneal surface and you'll try to gently scrape it by up and down sweeping motions. Okay, this is how you hold the needle, as you can see here. Please, you have to not hold it perpendicularly. Now, suppose the foreign body is slightly deeply embedded, then you can use a handheld magnet for removal of the foreign body. And then sometimes what happens is, especially with iron foreign bodies, there is a rust ring involved. Suppose you remove this foreign body, you can still see a ring of pigmentation here, which is a rust ring. So even that rust ring needs to be removed. Okay. Now, after removing the foreign body, you will install antibiotic ointment along with cycloplagics to relieve the spasm and provide better comfort. So this is how you manage a foreign body. Now we look at closed globe injuries. Now, as we have already discussed, closed globe injuries is where there is a partial thickness wound of the eyeball. Now, closed globe injuries could be either due to blunt trauma, either by direct blow to the eyeball by fist of the hand, or by balls, or by blunt instruments like big stones and sticks, or also sometimes in accidents, there can be accidental blunt trauma to the eyeball. Now, what exactly happens during trauma to the eyeball? Now, you can see in the first picture, whatever may be the object, there is impact. Firstly, direct impact on wherever the object first strikes, there is a direct impact. Now, what happens after that is, basically the eyeball is a fluid-filled structure. So once the direct impact occurs, there is now something known as a compression wave force. This compression wave force will start traveling in all the directions of the eyeball. But primarily what happens is, it will start, the main impact is borne by the iris lens diaphragm. This is the lens, and obviously you'll have the iris somewhere here. So this impact will push the iris lens diaphragm posteriorly like this. Okay. And then it will also hit the retina and the choroid layers. This is the compression wave force. Now, after hitting the retina and the choroid and pushing the iris lens posteriorly, what happens is, all these compression wave forces will be directed posteriorly or reflected towards the posterior pole of the eyeball where the macula lies. The center of the macula is the fovea. So here comes the reflected compression wave force. Now there is a direct force, there is a compression wave force which is finally reflected towards the posterior pole of the fovea. And what happens is, now all these wave force is again redirected anteriorly, now pushing the iris lens diaphragm anteriorly. So this is how mechanism of blunt trauma occurs. So basically your eyeball is being compressed like a spring, and again it is getting rebounded. So this is how the eyeball works, the trauma on the eyeball works. Now, as you can see, there was a blunt impact in this direction, and this was the lens, and these are the zonules, and this is the iris. Okay, this is the cornea. So there was compression and there was backward movement of the iris lens diaphragm. And what you have to remember is, when this eyeball is being compressed antero-posteriorly, what happens is, there is expansion of the eyeball in the equatorial direction. You can just imagine from this diagram, the eyeball was originally like this along the dotted line. Now, after being compressed, you can see there is expansion in the equatorial direction. It is just like that smiley ball When you try to compress it anterior posteriorly, there is expansion in the opposite, diametrically opposite directions. Okay. Now, what are the traumatic lesions of blunt trauma? They could be closed globe injury, a globe rupture, or extraocular lesions. We'll be looking at closed globe injuries. So, closed globe injuries, firstly, the cornea. So, in cornea, there could be simple abrasions of the cornea. Now, you can see this patient, there is something like a fingernail trauma. A fingernail got scratched here. Now, so what happens is there was breach of the corneal epithelium. And so it got stained positively with fluorescein. So the patient will come telling you that maybe there is some fingernail trauma or something got hit, and now there is extensive corneal abrasion. Okay, so these are diagnosed by fluorescein staining. It is simple abrasion, just a corneal epithelium damage. So how will you treat it? You will instill antibiotic ointment and then you will apply pad and bandage for 24 hours. And the next day when you stain with fluorescein, the patient is usually symptomless. He doesn't have any pain, discomfort or anything. And then even the fluorescein stain will be negative. But when he presents, he usually presents with severe pain and photophobia. This is simple abrasion. Here also you can see there is an abrasion of the corneal epithelium, and what is causing this was this foreign body which was lodged in the conjunctival part, tarsal conjunctival. So this was causing this corneal abrasion. Now what is the difference between corneal abrasion versus ulcer? Both of them will stain with fluorescein, but transparency abrasion is relatively transparent. Okay, you can see here there is an abrasion here, but definitely it's relatively transparent. Okay. And main thing, it is located in the epithelium level. Okay. But a corneal ulcer will start involving the stroma of the cornea also. This is located only at the epithelial level. Now, what is recurrent corneal erosions? Recurrent corneal erosions is again caused by fingernail trauma. Every day what happens is the patient will get up and he'll start complaining of acute pain and lacrimation on opening the eye in the mornings. This is mainly not due to, apart from underlying factors, the main factor is because the epithelium, the next layer is the Bowman's membrane. There is abnormally loose attachment of the epithelium to the Bowman's membrane. So this is a picture of recurrent corneal erosions where you can see there is breach of the epithelium due to repeated trauma with the fingernail or due to some underlying diseases. He can have recurrent erosions. As soon as he gets up in the morning, he'll have corneal erosions, and as day goes by, because of the lubricating action of the eyelids and everything, the abrasion will heal. Again in the morning, the same thing will repeat. So this is recurrent corneal erosions. Now, what is partial corneal tear? As the name implies, it is just a partial tear. Here you can see the corneal tear is partial. It is not extending full thickness of the cornea. This is a slit lamp section, an optical section of the cornea. You can see that there is only a partial tear of the cornea, not extending through and through to the cornea. Okay. Now, what is corneal edema? Now, because of the blunt trauma, what happens is there could be damage to the endothelial layer of the cornea. Because of that, there will be endothelial cell dysfunction and the cornea will start absorbing water or the fluid, aqueous fluid and other fluids. So what happens is here there is endothelial cell dysfunction, and you can see here in this part the cornea is not as clear as it is here. You can see there is cloudiness or haziness of the cornea. So this is all corneal edema, and you can see there is Descemet's folds. All these little groove-like, shallow groove-like things are nothing but folds in the Descemet's membrane. So corneal edema can be associated with haziness of the cornea, as you can see here, as well as with folds in the Descemet's membrane and increased thickness of the cornea due to absorbing of fluids. Now, what about tears in the Descemet's membrane? So here you can see there is a tear in the decimate membrane. So they usually occur in birth trauma, especially when there is forceps delivery. Usually there is a tear in the decimates membrane, and these tears are usually vertical in direction. Okay. Now this part, blood staining of cornea. Now what happens is, suppose there is an injury to the eye, and there is accumulation of blood in the anterior chamber. Hyphema is nothing but accumulation of blood in the anterior chamber. Now just going back to your picture here, as you people all already know, now this was the cornea, and this this is the cornea, and this chamber is the anterior chamber. Now imagine, because of blunt trauma, there is injury to the iris vessels here, and all the blood starts accumulating in the anterior chamber here. So accumulation of blood is nothing but hyphema. And because of a long standing hyphema, what happens is all this cornea will start getting stained with blood. So there can be blood staining of the cornea. So because of this blood staining of the cornea can be reddish brown or greenish in color. And as you can see, it is appearing as if a cataract, such as a nuclear cataract, has been dislocated and it has come into the anterior chamber. So the picture looks like that. It simulates dislocation of the lens into the anterior chamber. Okay. So blood staining of the cornea is actually an indication that the hyphema is to be immediately evacuated surgically. Otherwise, the cornea would be stained and it would take lots of time to clear. So if at all there is blood staining, it clears very slowly and from the periphery towards the center. That is centripetally, and may take up to 2 years. So any signs of blood staining of the cornea, it is an indication that the hyphema is to be evacuated. Now, what about deep corneal opacity? Suppose there is an injury to the cornea and there is permanent dysfunction of the endothelial cells. That part of the cornea can initially develop edema, corneal edema, and later can also develop a deep corneal opacity associated with folds in the decimates membrane. So this is how it looks. Okay. Now, as you all know, again, just for anatomy's sake, this was the cornea. The iris is underlying here, the pupil. And this is the conjunctiva. Conjunctiva is a translucent layer, and beneath it lies the sclera. So there can be partial thickness wounds of the sclera. So usually scleral wounds, they can occur in isolation like this. That is just wounds of the sclera due to some blunt trauma. Or sometimes there can be, they usually occur along in combination with the cornea. There can be corneal lacerations, partial thickness, as well as a partial thickness scleral laceration. So these are lacerations of the sclera, lamellar lacerations, because we're talking about blunt trauma, partial thickness. Now again, as I've already spoken about, this is the hyphema which I was talking about. So if this hyphema is total, it looks like this. Here you can see that there is hyphema only up to this level. There is injury to the iris or ciliary vessels, and then this hyphema collects here. Suppose there is extensive hyphema, you cannot see the iris and the pupil. The anterior chamber will be totally filled with blood, and if it is allowed to continue, you will have blood staining of the cornea. Now, in anterior chamber, one more thing which you can find is exudates. Now, what happens is, due to the trauma, there can be irritation of the iris, and then there can be anterior uveitis or iridocyclitis, which is inflammation of the iris and the ciliary body. Because of the inflammation of the iris, there can be outpouring of exudates into the anterior chamber, which are primarily composed of fibrin. Now you can see here carefully that in the anterior chamber, that is between the cornea and the iris, you can see that there is an exudate here. all this light brownish color tinge which you can see is formation of an exudate in a case of traumatic iridocyclitis. Okay, this would require the regular treatment for iridocyclitis as you treat for any iridocyclitis. Your cycloplegic drugs, your steroids, topical steroids. Okay. Now, what about the iris? Now, in iris, pupil and ciliary body, we'll see what are the changes which can occur in blunt trauma. In blunt trauma, you can see traumatic miosis and mydriasis. What is miosis? Miosis is when the pupil is smaller than the normal size. That is a constricted pupil, and mydriasis is when the pupil is larger than the normal size or a dilated pupil. Now, why does miosis occur? Due to the irritation of the ciliary nerves which are supplying the globe. What happens is, on impact of the blunt trauma, these ciliary nerves will get irritated and they can cause a myosed pupil like this. Mydriasis, what happens is, sometimes there is damage to the sphincter pupillae muscle which constricts the pupil, and then there can be cycloplegia due to damage to the ciliary muscle, and this will cause mydriasis or dilatation. So this is a case of mydriatic pupil where there is traumatic mydriasis of the pupil. Here the pupil is slightly irregular, and as well as there is dilatation of the pupil. Here also you can see this was a case of blunt trauma. Here you can see there is a hyphema in the eye, as well as the pupil is larger in size or has undergone traumatic mydriasis in comparison to the other eye which was normal. Okay. Now, what are the other features? You can see rupture of the pupillary margin. Here you can appreciate very well that this side of the pupil is relatively smooth here. Okay, this side is smooth, but this side you can appreciate all these tiny tears here, all these, okay, and as well as here. So all these are nothing but there is rupture of the pupillary margin. Okay. Now, suppose here also there was a rupture of the pupillary margin, as well as the tear has well extended beyond the pupillary margin into the stroma of the iris. So there can also be radiating tears in the iris stroma. Okay, this is how it looks. Now, what is iridodialysis? Now, the iris, you can see here, it is well attached to the, this part is known as the root of the iris. Okay, this root of the iris is attached beyond the ciliary body all 360 degrees. Now, what is iridodialysis? It is detachment of the iris from its root. So you can see at this part, the iris is no longer attached but detached. So it leads to the formation of a D-shaped pupil. This is the D-shaped pupil here. You can see this is the pupil. Okay, and this part is detached, and this forms a black biconvex area. You can see. Okay, so this is known as iridodialysis. Now, what is anti-flexion of the iris? Sometimes there is some extensive iridodialysis like this. Okay, when there is extensive iridodialysis, what happens is, you can see now actually this part of the iris was actually attached here. Okay, now this attached part of the iris has fallen down, and what you're seeing, this small triangle here, which you're seeing is nothing but the posterior surface of the iris. I hope I'm clear. Just imagine a paper which has just fallen down into half from up to down. So what you're seeing is the posterior surface of the iris, that is anti-flexion of the iris. The iris folding itself, the iris folding on itself anteriorly. Now, what is retroflexion of the iris? Imagine the iris folding itself on itself posteriorly. Then what happens is, usually there is attachment on one side, and then what happens is the iris folds back on itself and it is somewhere hidden in the ciliary region. That is retroflexion. Okay. Now, what is aniridia? Now, traumatic aniridia is when, one second. So, traumatic aniridia is when the completely torn iris, suppose just imagine instead of one half or one quadrant or anything, there is total 360 degrees detachment of the iris from the ciliary body. Now what happens is the iris is free in the anterior chamber and ultimately it will sink to the bottom of the anterior chamber in the form of a small ball. Now if you look at this picture, you cannot see the iris anywhere. What you're seeing directly here is the lens. The iris is completely gone due to the trauma and it has sunk somewhere into the anterior chamber. You can directly see the cataractus lens. Okay, this is aniridia. Now, what is angle recession? Just remember that the ciliary body has a longitudinal and circular muscle fibers, and what happens is angle recession occurs. Just for remembrance sake, there is a ciliary body band here which can be seen on gonioscopy. Gonioscopy is nothing but the technique used to examine the angles of the anterior chamber. So on gonioscopy, you can see a wide ciliary body band. It is a widened and thickened ciliary body band can be seen in angle recession. Now, why is this angle recession important? This is important because it can later lead to angle recession glaucoma. Okay, so this is important. Now, why could aniridia or any lesions of the or any other things of the iris can be important? When you don't have the iris, you are not able to regulate the amount of light entering the eye through the pupil, and the patient will experience a lot of problems like glare and photophobia. So in order to understand this, we need to know that the iris lesions are important. Now, what are the lesions of the iris can occur? As we've already discussed, traumatic iridocyclitis or uveitis can occur, and post-trauma iris atrophy can occur. The treatment will obviously be the same for iridocyclitis, atropine, steroids, and to prevent secondary infection, we would also instill antibiotics. Now, this is another example of a aniridia case. You can only see the iris in this part, but the other part of the iris has been detached. Okay. Now here there is again an example of a traumatic iridocyclitis. You can see a fibrin strand. This is post-traumatic iris atrophy here. What you're seeing is atrophy of the iris where there is loss of structure and architecture of the iris here. These are post-traumatic atrophy patches of the iris. Here also you can see the pupil is quite irregular in shape. There is post-traumatic iris atrophy in this part. Okay. Now, what about the next part? This is nothing but the Vossius ring. Now, this is an important question for you, a 2-mark question. Now, what is Vossius ring? Now, what happens is when the blunt impact or the injury occurs, what happens is, as we have already seen, there can be traumatic meiosis of the pupil. Now, what happens is this traumatic meiosed pupil will come and strike on the, as I've said, in blunt trauma, everything has been going posteriorly, right? So the impact is posteriorly. So what happens is the pupil, which is the pupil here, will go and impact on the lens, will go and hit the lens posteriorly. So because of that, what happens is this pupillary margin will get imprinted on the anterior capsule of the lens, and it is seen as a circular ring of brown pigment. Okay, so this is how it looks. This is known as the Vossius ring. Now, what is concussion cataract? Now, concussion cataract, as the name implies, is a form of traumatic cataract. What happens is this cataract mainly develops either due to the mechanical effects of the trauma, because there is direct injury of the lens fibers, or it can also occur due to imbibition of aqueous fluid by the cataract. So concussion cataract can form a variety of cataracts. The most common one is the rosette cataract due to trauma. Now, this cataract forms along the posterior suture lines of the lens, okay, and this is known as the rosette shaped cataract. Or other cataracts can also include a total cataract in the lens, but the main name which you have to remember is the rosette cataract, okay, which forms along the posterior sutures, resulting in a flower-shaped cataract. Now, what are the other problems which can occur whenever there is blunt trauma? Subluxation of limbs. Now, what is the main difference between subluxation and dislocation of limbs? Now, you know the lens is held in place with the help of zonular fibers. Suppose the zonular fibers are lost in only one quadrant or one half. Then the lens will be pulled towards the site of intact zonules. So that is known as subluxation due to partial tear of zonules. And there is displacement of lens. But the lens is still present in the pupillary area. You can see the lens is still partly present in the pupillary area. This is known as subluxation. Now, dislocation of lens, suppose when there is 360 degrees rupture of zonules, the lens is no longer held in support by the zonules because all the zonules have ruptured. Now, the lens will automatically fall either anteriorly into the anterior chamber or posteriorly into the vitreous. Or sometimes it can also fall extraocularly into the subconjunctival space. Now you can see this is a 360 degrees dislocation of the, this is a dislocation of the lens due to 360 degrees rupture of the zonules. The lens is completely in the anterior chamber. Now please remember, this will simulate corneal blood staining. So these are the two differential diagnoses. Here also in this picture also you can see this is the lens which has completely come into the anterior chamber. Okay, this is the dislocated lens. Or it can also be extraocularly. Now because of blunt trauma, what happened? The lens which came into the anterior chamber has finally landed into the subconjunctival space. It is now below the conjunctiva extraocularly. That is outside. Okay, this is intraocular. Now, what are the changes which we can see in the vitreous? Now, vitreous is the, as you all recall, it is a jelly-like substance which occupies this space behind the posterior lens capsule. This is all vitreous jelly. Now, because of this, what can happen is there can either be a vitreous hemorrhage. There can be hemorrhage in the vitreous due to injury to the retinal vessels or the choroidal vessels. There can be a retinal vitreous hemorrhage, or there can also be detached vitreous. As you all know, the vitreous is attached all around here. Okay. Now this vitreous can detach itself and cause a vitreous detachment, or the vitreous can start condensing in some areas and form these vitreous opacities. Okay. These commonly appear to you. I'm sure some myopes are well aware that they experience floaters or small wavy particles which they see floating in the air. These are vitreous floaters caused due to these vitreous stringy opacities. So a vitreous hemorrhage can occur, a detached vitreous can occur, vitreous floaters can occur, as well as the vitreous can herniate itself. Vitreous herniation in anterior chamber may occur with subluxation or dislocation of lens. See, this was the lens. Suppose the lens has undergone subluxation or dislocation anteriorly. The lens is the structure which is holding all this vitreous in place, from coming forwards. So once this lens undergoes subluxation or dislocation, the vitreous will find a path to come forwards into the anterior chamber somewhat like this. So this is what you're seeing here. This bulges, which you can see, is nothing but the vitreous protruding or herniating itself into the anterior chamber. So this is the vitreous herniation. Now, what about the choroid? The main thing which you are seeing here is rupture of choroid. Now, as you recall, the innermost layer of the eye is the retina, and then surrounding it is the choroid layer. So what happens is, because of trauma, there can be rupture of the choroid layer. Okay, and these ruptures are seen as crescents, whitish crescents, which are parallel to the optic disc. Okay, this is the optic disc. The crescents are parallel to the optic disc. And how will you know that it is there in the choroid layer? You can see that the retinal vessels are passing over the crescents. Okay, so it indicates that there is one more layer above this crescent, which is nothing but the retina. So this is the rupture of the choroid. Now, other features you can see, A choroidal hemorrhage can also occur. As you can see, again, the retinal vessels are passing over the hemorrhage. So it is choroidal hemorrhage, or a choroidal detachment can occur along, obviously accompanied with retinal detachment. And there can also be choroiditis. I'm sure you're familiar with this picture from your uveitis classes. So choroiditis can also occur. Okay, these are all choroidal complications. Now, what about retinal complications? Now, this is important for you. This is an important topic, commotio retinae or Berlin's edema. So what happens is, as soon as the blunt impact occurs, sometimes the retina can be affected. And what happens is, there is a milky white cloudiness. Okay. Now, what is normal? What is abnormal here? This is the normal retina. Okay, with a reddish glow of the fundus, and this is a milky white retina here. This is due to edema. This is due to retinal edema. Okay, so there is a milky white cloudiness of the retina, and especially if it involves the posterior pole of the retina, it is known as Berlin's edema. So this is the impact of the blunt trauma. You can see here and here as well itself. Now, this is a milky white retina, especially at the posterior pole or the macular region. And in the center, you can see a cherry red spot of the fovea. So, if it is especially present at the posterior pole, it is known as Berlin's edema. Okay. So, what happens is this edema can resolve after a few days, or it can also show some pigmentary changes at the macular region. Either of these can occur, but usually the treatment is will wait and watch. We will be observing it for a few days closely. So how does commotio retinae occur? It is present in the retinal quadrant opposite to the site of impact, that is counterpoof injury. So suppose the most common site, suppose if it is inferolaterally you hit a person, the person gets hits on by an eye, the impact will be seen of commotio retinae. If you do it, it will be seen superinasally. Okay, suppose you hit the person inferolaterally, it will be superinasally. So may be located in any region, but common in the posterior pole and the macular region. If it involves posterior pole, it is known as Berlin's edema. So this is an important thing. So please understand it and write. It is a milky white cloudiness. Okay. In this picture also, this is not the posterior pole, but some other area, there is milky white cloudiness of the retina. Here, the posterior pole is involved. You can trace out the border of the edema like this. This is all the edematous area, okay? All this milky white area. Now, what are the other features which can occur in trauma? Retinal hemorrhages can occur. Now you can see there are lots of flame-shaped hemorrhages in the retina can occur, and this is a V-shaped hemorrhage, pre-retinal hemorrhage. Pre-retinal hemorrhage is existing between the retina and the posterior vitreous surface. So when a hemorrhage exists there, it is usually a D-shaped hemorrhage or a boat-shaped hemorrhage. This is a pre-retinal hemorrhage, and it can be sight-threatening or vision-threatening, because it may exist in the posterior pole area or the macular region. Apart from that, you can have flame-shaped hemorrhages also. So these are retinal hemorrhages. Now, what are retinal tears? So simple, as self-explanatory as the term, there can be a tear in the retina. Now you can see there is a tear in the retina here. This is a horseshoe-shaped tear in the retina. So these are tears in the retina. Now, again, because there is a tear in the retina, the vitreous can start entering this part, and eventually you will have a retinal detachment present. Okay, there is a retinal detachment. Now, in long-standing cases, because of the trauma, there can be a vitreous hemorrhage, as we've already discussed. There can be retinal hemorrhages, tears, and detachments. And finally, you can have fibroproliferative bands in the retina, which will severely hamper the vision. This is traumatic proliferative retinopathy. Okay, secondary to vitreous hemorrhage, the vitreous hemorrhage will start organizing and eventually form fibroproliferative bands in the retina, forming traumatic proliferative retinopathy or retinitis proliferans. Okay. Now, what are the concussion changes at the macula? At macula, there can be macular edema, as you can see by the milky white appearance, or you can have a full thickness macular hole. This is how a macular hole looks. A round or oval structure with reddish tinge. This is how a macular hole looks. So you can have macular edema, or you can also have a macular hole. Now, what are the changes in IOP changes in closed globe injury? You can either have traumatic glaucoma, as we've already seen, there can be angle recession glaucoma, or there can be IOP rise due to hyphema. Okay, long-standing hyphema will cause rise in IOP, or there can also be rise in IOP due to iridocyclitis. So all these can cause traumatic glaucoma. Now, why there can be hypotony? So initially when there is blunt trauma or impact, a strong impact on the eyeball, the ciliary body can temporarily go into ciliary body shock, and it will stop secreting aqueous fluid or aqueous humor. And then there can be hypotony, or in long-standing cases, the ciliary body may undergo atrophy, and eventually the IOP, the intraocular pressure of the eyeball, can reduce. So there can be either of those. There can be glaucoma, rise in IOP, or hypotony, decrease in the intraocular pressure. Now, the last one, what are the traumatic changes in refraction? So, suppose there is why will myopia occur? Suppose there is rupture of the zonules and the lens is subluxated anteriorly. So, because the lens is subluxated anteriorly, the rays will be refracted and the focal point will be in front of the retina, causing myopia. Now, what about hypermetropia? Suppose there is damage to the ciliary body, as I've already spoken. It is responsible for ciliary spasm and accommodation, so that will be lost, and this will cause hypermetropia. So there can be either myopia or there can also be hypermetropia. So this is about closed globe injuries. In the next class, we'll be discussing open globe as well as a bit about intraocular foreign bodies. So I hope you understood. Do you have any questions? Okay, thank you.